Ana Maria Cardona. In 1990, Ana Maria Cardona's 3-year-old son, Lázaro Figueroa, was found in Miami bushes, weighing just 18 pounds and covered in injuries that would shock investigators. The case became known as the Baby Lollipops tragedy after the shirt the toddler was wearing when discovered. Ana Maria Cardona was born in Cuba around 1961, arriving in the United States during the 1980 Mariel boat lift. She faced poverty and instability in Miami, struggling to survive in a new country with limited education and resources. Cardona became involved with men connected to the substance trade, relying on these relationships for financial support. When her partner was ended, she lost that support and directed her rage toward her young son. What happened to Lázaro? The autopsy revealed Lázaro had suffered extreme malnutrition, beatings, and various forms of harm. His body showed fractures, burns, and evidence of prolonged suffering. Forensic evidence demonstrated that Cardona had harmed Lázaro with belts and other objects, denying him food while directing years of frustration at the helpless child. His body was dumped in bushes on November 2, 1990. Experts suggested that rage from her lost financial support fueled the mistreatment, possibly linked to untreated trauma from her difficult life circumstances. However, no background could justify what she did to her son. How was she caught? Cardona's partner, Olivia Gonzalez, eventually confessed to authorities, leading to Cardona's arrest. Gonzalez testified that Cardona had called the child evil and blamed him for her hardships. The confession provided investigators with details about the systematic nature of Lázaro's mistreatment. Cardona hadn't simply lost control once. She had directed sustained cruelty at her son over an extended period. What happened at trial? Cardona faced 3 separate trials in the Baby Lollipops case. She was first found guilty in 1992 and sentenced to death, but this verdict was vacated due to jury issues. A second trial in 2011 again resulted in a death sentence, which was also vacated. The third trial in 2017 finally resulted in a conviction and life sentence that would stand. Throughout proceedings, Cardona denied intending to end Lázaro's life, though the evidence of prolonged harm contradicted claims of accidental death. The pattern of injuries demonstrated deliberate cruelty. What is her current status? As of 2026, Ana Maria Cardona is incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida, serving her life sentence. While her 2017 life sentence remains in place, Cardona has continued to file pro se petitions and motions for post-conviction relief through 2024 and 2025, though all major appeals challenging the conviction itself were exhausted by 2020. The Baby Lollipops case highlighted failures in child protection systems Lázaro suffered for years before his death, yet no intervention came to save him from his mother's cruelty. The case drew comparisons to other high-profile instances of harm to children, sparking discussions about how communities can better identify and prevent such tragedies. Lázaro's suffering left lasting impacts on all who encountered the case. Social workers and law enforcement who investigated the scene were traumatized by the extent of harm inflicted on such a young child. The nickname Baby Lollipops became synonymous with one of Miami's most heartbreaking cases. Cardona's 3 trials over 25+ years demonstrated the legal system's commitment to justice for Lázaro, even as procedural issues required repeated prosecution. The persistence ensured she would ultimately face accountability. The repeated vacating of death sentences highlighted complexities in Florida's capital punishment process, particularly regarding jury selection and sentencing procedures. Legal reforms following cases like Cardona's changed how death penalty cases are handled. Miami's Cuban immigrant community grappled with the case's implications, as Cardona's Mariel boatlift background became part of public discussions. The tragedy highlighted struggles faced by some immigrants while emphasizing that poverty never excuses harming children. from a case involving harm to a young victim to one centered on self-defense claims. Ashley Benefield. On September 27, 2020, former ballerina Ashley Benefield shot and ended the life of her estranged husband, Doug Benefield, in their Bradenton, Florida home. The case would become known as the Black Swan trial, drawing media attention to the former dancer's dramatic claims. Ashley Benefield, née Byers, was born around 1993 in South Carolina, showing early talent as a ballerina trainee. She faced the intense pressures common in competitive dance, a world where perfection is demanded and failure is devastating. Ashley's ballet career brought her into contact with Doug Benefield, a significantly older man. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage despite the age gap, creating a relationship that would prove volatile. What led to the shooting? Ashley and Doug's marriage quickly deteriorated, with both sides alleging various forms of harmful behavior. Ashley claimed she feared for her safety, describing incidents that she said justified her actions. The couple was in the process of separating when the fatal confrontation occurred. Ashley was helping Doug move belongings when an argument erupted. Ashley shot Doug once, ending his life. She immediately claimed self-defense, asserting she had feared he would harm her during the confrontation. What did the evidence show? Ballistics analysis showed a single gunshot, but forensic examination suggested no immediate physical threat to Ashley when she fired. The positioning of the body and other physical evidence contradicted some aspects of her self-defense narrative. Prosecutors argued that Ashley had shot an unarmed man who posed no imminent danger at the moment she pulled the trigger. The self-defense claim required proving she faced immediate threat of death or serious harm. Ashley testified extensively at trial about fearing for her life, describing prior incidents in their relationship. She portrayed herself as a victim who had finally fought back against someone who had controlled and frightened her. What happened at trial? The trial in 2024 captivated observers with its Black Swan narrative, as prosecutors and defense attorneys presented competing versions of the marriage. Was Ashley a battered woman who defended herself, or a manipulator who ended her husband? The jury ultimately convicted Ashley of manslaughter rather than the more serious charge, suggesting they found some credibility in her fear claims but didn't fully accept her self-defense argument. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a significant term that acknowledged Doug's death while reflecting the jury's partial acceptance of mitigating circumstances. What is her current status? On October 30th, 2024, a judge granted Ashley Benefield a $100,000 bond pending the appeal of her manslaughter conviction. As of early 2026, she is released from custody under house arrest and GPS monitoring while the appellate court reviews her case. The Black Swan case raised difficult questions about domestic relationships and self-defense. Some viewed Ashley as a victim who defended herself, while others saw her claims as manipulation to justify ending her husband. Doug Benefield's family maintains he was the victim, ended by someone who manipulated narratives to justify her actions. They argue the evidence didn't support Ashley's portrayal of imminent danger. The case demonstrates how competing narratives in domestic cases can create profound uncertainty. Without clear evidence of immediate threat, self-defense claims face skepticism even when prior relationship issues existed. Ashley's ballet background added dramatic flair to media coverage, but the core question remained simple. Did she reasonably fear for her life when she pulled the trigger? The jury's manslaughter verdict suggested they believed the truth lay somewhere between the extremes. The Black Swan moniker arose from Ashley's ballet career and the dramatic nature of the case, with media drawing parallels to the psychological thriller film. The nickname stuck despite not fully capturing the complexities of the actual events. Legal experts noted that the jury's verdict, manslaughter rather than acquittal or conviction on more serious charges, reflected their difficulty in fully accepting either side's narrative. The middle ground verdict, suggested they found Ashley's fear claims partially credible, without fully believing she faced the imminent danger required for self-defense. From self-defense claims to someone whose crimes targeted the most vulnerable. Christine Falling. Between 1980 and 1982, Christine Falling ended the lives of at least 3 young children while working as a babysitter in Florida, earning her the moniker Killer Babysitter. Investigators suspect she may have harmed as many as 5 children during her brief but deadly babysitting career. Christine Laverne Falling was born on March 12, 1963, in Perry, Florida, into a chaotic household with 11 siblings. Her parents abandoned the family, and Christine spent time in orphanages where she experienced various forms of mistreatment. Christine suffered from epilepsy and possible developmental delays, conditions that went without proper treatment during her difficult childhood. The combination of neglect, institutional care, and untreated medical issues created profound challenges. What drove her to harm children? Christine claimed that voices compelled her to end the children's lives, describing auditory hallucinations that commanded her actions. Experts suggested she might have suffered from Munchausen syndrome, seeking attention through the children's deaths. Some psychologists theorized her actions stemmed from untreated mental illness linked to childhood trauma. The combination of voices, possible Munchausen tendencies, and deep psychological damage created a deadly mix. Whatever the underlying psychology, Christine had multiple opportunities to stop, but instead continued accepting babysitting jobs. Each new family trusted her with their most precious possessions, unaware of the danger. Who were her victims? Christine's known victims included Cassidy Johnson, Travis Coleman, and Jennifer Daniels, all very young when they died in her care. She also is suspected in the deaths of other children, though she was only prosecuted for 3. The children died from smothering, with Christine using pillows or her hands to prevent them from breathing. She then claimed the deaths were accidents or sudden infant death syndrome. How was she caught? The autopsy of Travis Coleman revealed internal ruptures inconsistent with natural death, finally triggering serious investigation. Medical examiners determined the injuries couldn't have occurred accidentally. When confronted by investigators, Christine confessed, "I killed him." She admitted smothering the children, stating, "I just picked him off his pallet and choked him," about one victim. Her confession included admitting to 5 deaths total, though she was only charged with 3. The casual manner in which she described ending young lives disturbed investigators. What happened at trial? Rather than face trial, Christine pleaded guilty to 3 counts in December 1982. The plea deal allowed her to avoid the death penalty, receiving life imprisonment instead. She was sentenced to life for each count, ensuring she would never again have the opportunity to harm children. The sentences acknowledged that whatever mental health issues she faced, she posed too great a danger to ever be released. What is her current status? Christine Falling remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. Her parole was denied in 2017, with the board determining she continues to pose risks. While her parole was denied, her presumptive parole release date, PPRD, was technically set for the year 2262. In the Florida system, this serves as a symbolic life sentence that effectively ensures she will never be eligible for a meaningful release hearing in her lifetime. No further appeals have been noted, and she will likely spend the remainder of her life behind bars. The families of her victims gained some measure of justice through her continued incarceration. The killer babysitter case raised awareness about the importance of thoroughly vetting childcare providers. Christine's troubled background and mental health issues should have disqualified her from caring for vulnerable children. The deaths initially appeared to be sudden infant death syndrome or accidents, highlighting how difficult it can be to detect suffocation when no external injuries are present. Only advanced forensic analysis of Travis Coleman's body revealed the truth. Christine's claims of hearing voices that commanded her to harm children suggested severe mental illness. However, the repeated nature of her crimes across multiple families indicated some level of awareness and choice. Her confession was remarkably casual, describing the endings without apparent emotional response. This detachment disturbed investigators who struggled to understand how someone could speak so matter-of-factly about ending young lives. Families who had trusted Christine with their children were devastated to learn she had harmed them. The betrayal of trust made the losses even more painful. From harming those in her care to America's most notorious female serial killer, Aileen Wuornos. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos ended the lives of 7 men in Florida, becoming America's first modern female serial killer. Her crimes while working as a prostitute along Florida highways would eventually lead to her execution and inspire books and films. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her childhood involved severe mistreatment from family members, creating trauma that would shape her entire life trajectory. By her teenage years, Aileen was living on the streets and supporting herself through various means. She eventually made her way to Florida, where she hitchhiked and engaged in work that put her in contact with countless men. What drove her to become a serial killer? Aileen claimed she acted in self-defense, asserting the men had attempted to harm her. However, evidence showed she robbed her victims after shooting them, suggesting financial gain rather than defensive action. Psychological experts suggested Aileen suffered from borderline personality disorder and trauma from childhood experiences. The combination of mental illness, difficult life circumstances, and substance use created conditions for her deadly behavior. Aileen's first victim was Richard Mallory, shot and robbed in November 1989. She would continue selecting victims throughout 1989 and 1990, all men she encountered while hitchhiking. How did she select and attack victims? Aileen would get into vehicles with men seeking her services, then at some point during the encounter would shoot them. She used a firearm to end their lives, then robbed them of cash, vehicles, and other valuables. The pattern was consistent across victims. All were shot and robbed. This consistency suggested calculated behavior rather than panicked self-defense, as she claimed. After taking their belongings, Aileen would abandon the bodies and vehicles in various locations across Florida. The geographic spread initially complicated investigations. How was she caught? In January 1991, police arrested Aileen after tracing pawned items from victims back to her. The physical evidence linking her to multiple scenes proved overwhelming. After arrest, Aileen confessed to the killings. In one particularly chilling statement, she said, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice," acknowledging both the endings and the theft. Ballistics matched her weapon to multiple crime scenes, providing forensic corroboration of her confession. The scientific evidence eliminated any doubt about her involvement. What happened at trial? Aileen was convicted in January 1992 for the ending of Richard Mallory and sentenced to death. She subsequently pleaded no contest to additional charges rather than face multiple trials. Each case resulted in death sentences, with the court finding aggravating circumstances that warranted capital punishment. Aileen's robbery of victims and multiple offenses made her a clear candidate for Florida's death penalty. Throughout proceedings, Aileen alternated between claiming self-defense and admitting to the crimes. Her inconsistent statements suggested manipulation of narratives depending on her audience. What was her execution? On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection in Florida, ending her life after over a decade on death row. She declined to appeal further, apparently ready to face execution. Her case has been extensively studied in serial killer psychology. She represented the first modern American woman to fit the classic serial killer profile, changing assumptions about who commits such crimes. Documentaries and films, including Monster, have examined Aileen's life and crimes. The media attention ensured her notoriety would outlive her. The fact that Aileen claimed self-defense while also admitting to robbery highlighted contradictions in her narrative. True self-defense doesn't typically include robbing the supposed attacker afterward. Aileen's childhood trauma was extensively documented, with experts debating how much her early experiences contributed to her later crimes. While trauma may explain some aspects of her psychology, it couldn't excuse serial ending for profit. Her relationship with Tyria Moore, a woman she was romantically involved with, played a role in her capture. Moore cooperated with police, helping to secure Aileen's confession. Aileen's case sparked debates about the death penalty for women, with some arguing gender shouldn't matter in capital cases, while others questioned whether female serial killers should face the same ultimate punishment as males. From serial killing to methodical poisoning for profit. Judy Buenoano. Between the 1970s and 1980s, Judy Buenoano poisoned multiple family members for insurance money, earning her the nickname Black Widow. She would become one of the few women executed in Florida, her crimes demonstrating calculated greed over extended periods. Judy was born Judius Welty in Texas in 1943, experiencing a difficult childhood marked by early loss and instability. Her background involved various hardships that may have contributed to her later actions, though they couldn't excuse methodical poisoning for profit. Judy married and had children, presenting herself as a devoted family woman. Behind this facade, she was planning to end those closest to her for financial gain. Who were her victims? Judy's first victim was her husband James Goodyear, whom she poisoned in 1971. She collected insurance money after his death, which was initially attributed to natural causes. Her own son became her next victim, poisoned and then drowned when she took him canoeing. She again collected insurance proceeds, benefiting financially from her son's death. Judy also attempted to end her boyfriend through a car bombing, though he survived the attack. The bombing attempt would eventually lead investigators to examine her prior accidental deaths more closely. How did she poison her victims? Judy used arsenic to slowly poison her victims, administering it over time to create the appearance of illness. The gradual poisoning avoided immediate suspicion while ensuring her victims would eventually succumb. The use of poison demonstrated planning and callousness. Judy watched family members suffer from her administered substances, maintaining her caring facade while methodically ending their lives. Each death brought insurance payouts, which Judy collected without apparent remorse. The financial motive drove her to betray those who trusted her most. How was she caught? The car bombing of her boyfriend raised suspicions that led investigators to examine the earlier deaths. What had appeared to be natural deaths or accidents began looking far more sinister. Exhumations and toxicology tests revealed arsenic poisoning in her husband and son. The forensic evidence proved these weren't natural deaths, but methodical endings. Investigators traced the pattern of insurance claims and suspicious deaths surrounding Judy. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone who ended family members for profit. What happened at trial? Judy was convicted of charges related to the poisoning and bombing. The evidence of premeditated harm for financial gain warranted the death penalty. Her trials revealed the extent of her manipulation and greed. Judy had presented herself as a grieving widow and mother, while actually being responsible for those very deaths. On March 30th, 1998, Judy Buenoano was executed in Florida's electric chair, becoming one of the few women executed in the state. Her death ended a saga of betrayal and calculated harm spanning decades. The Black Widow case demonstrated how insurance fraud can escalate to serial harm. Judy's willingness to end her own family members for money revealed profound moral bankruptcy. Judy's execution in Florida's electric chair made her one of the few women to face capital punishment in the state. The use of the electric chair, Florida's method before adopting lethal injection, added to the case's notoriety. The arsenic poisoning method showed Judy's calculated approach. Rather than impulsive violence, she methodically administered poison over time, watching her victims suffer while maintaining her facade as a caring wife and mother. The car bombing attempt on her boyfriend proved to be Judy's undoing. The violent nature of the attack finally prompted investigators to look more closely at other deaths surrounding her. From poisoning family to targeting a lottery winner. Doris D.D. Moore. In 2009, Doris D.D. Moore befriended lottery winner Abraham Shakespeare, then ended his life and stole his fortune. Shakespeare had won $30 million in 2006, making him a target for someone willing to manipulate and ultimately harm him for money. D.D. Moore presented herself as a businesswoman who could help Shakespeare manage his newfound wealth. In reality, she systematically stole from him before deciding to end his life to cover up her theft. Abraham Shakespeare was a working-class man who had little experience managing large sums of money. His lottery win should have brought joy and security, but instead made him vulnerable to a predator. How did Moore manipulate Shakespeare? Dee ingratiated herself with Shakespeare, claiming she could help him with business opportunities and financial management. Shakespeare, trusting her claims of expertise, gave her increasing access to his funds. Moore used her position to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from Shakespeare. When he began questioning where his money was going, she decided to eliminate him rather than face accountability. The betrayal was particularly cruel because Shakespeare had trusted Moore to help him. Instead of protecting his interests, she exploited his lack of financial sophistication to steal his winnings. What happened to Abraham Shakespeare? In April 2009, Moore shot Abraham Shakespeare and ended his life. She then buried his body under a concrete slab on property she controlled, hoping to conceal the crime indefinitely. After ending Shakespeare's life, Moore continued to steal from his accounts, using his phone to send messages claiming he was alive and traveling. The deception bought her time to drain more money. Shakespeare's family became concerned when they couldn't reach him. His sudden disappearance seemed inconsistent with his personality and habits. How was she caught? Investigators became suspicious of Moore's explanations about Shakespeare's whereabouts. Her stories kept changing, and financial records showed her accessing his funds after he supposedly left town. In January 2010, Shakespeare's body was discovered under the concrete slab. The forensic evidence confirmed he had been shot, and the burial location pointed to Moore's involvement. Phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimony all connected Moore to the crime. Her elaborate cover-up unraveled as investigators pieced together what had happened. What happened at trial? Moore was convicted of first-degree charges in 2012. She was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for ending Shakespeare's life and stealing his lottery winnings. Throughout the trial, Moore maintained her innocence and offered various explanations. The evidence against her proved overwhelming, and the jury rejected her claims. What is her current status? Doris D.D. Moore remains incarcerated in Florida serving her life sentence. She will never be released for the calculated harm she committed for financial gain. Abraham Shakespeare's tragic story serves as a cautionary tale about lottery winners becoming targets. His generosity and trust made him vulnerable to someone who saw him only as a source of money. The case highlighted how sudden wealth can attract predators. Moore specifically targeted Shakespeare because of his lottery winnings, demonstrating the dangers winners face from those willing to manipulate and harm for profit. Shakespeare's family had warned him about Moore, sensing something wasn't right about her sudden interest in helping him. Their concerns proved tragically prescient. The concrete burial demonstrated Moore's cold calculation. She didn't simply dispose of the body, but went to great lengths to conceal it, suggesting she had planned for the ending in advance. Moore's attempts to impersonate Shakespeare after his death showed her willingness to continue the deception. She sent texts from his phone and made excuses about his whereabouts, all while draining his accounts, from targeting a lottery winner to a love triangle turned deadly. Amelia Carr. In 2009, Amelia Carr participated in the ending of Heather Strong in a love triangle dispute in Marion County, Florida. Carr and her boyfriend, Joshua Fulgham, lured Strong to a remote location where they ended her life, demonstrating how jealousy can escalate to deadly violence. Amelia Carr had been involved with Joshua Fulgham, but complications arose when Heather Strong also became romantically entangled with him. The situation created a triangle that would ultimately prove fatal for Strong. Carr reportedly had a high IQ but faced various family issues growing up. Her intelligence didn't prevent her from making terrible decisions driven by jealousy and impulsivity. What happened to Heather Strong? On February 15, 2009, Carr and Fulgham lured Heather Strong to a remote area. They attacked and ended her life, then attempted to conceal the body to avoid detection. Amelia Carr was pregnant at the time she participated in ending Strong's life, a fact that would later influence sentencing considerations. Her pregnancy didn't prevent her involvement in the violent attack. The ending of Heather Strong wasn't a crime of passion in the moment, but rather a planned attack. Carr and Fulgham had discussed what to do about the love triangle and decided to eliminate Strong. How were they caught? Strong's disappearance triggered a missing person investigation. Investigators eventually discovered her body and began examining who had motives to harm her. The love triangle became apparent during the investigation, pointing suspicion toward Carr and Fulgham. Evidence emerged showing they had discussed eliminating Strong before her disappearance. Forensic evidence and witness testimony connected both Carr and Fulgham to Strong's death. The case against them proved strong enough to secure convictions. What happened at trial? Both Amelia Carr and Joshua Fulgham were convicted of first-degree charges. Both initially received death sentences, reflecting the premeditated nature of the crime. However, Carr's death sentence was later vacated, and she was resentenced to life in prison. Her pregnancy at the time of the crime and other factors may have influenced the resentencing. What is her current status? Amelia Carr is serving a life sentence in Florida for her role in ending Heather Strong's life. She will spend the remainder of her years behind bars for the jealousy-driven crime. The case demonstrates how romantic entanglements can escalate from emotional conflict to deadly violence. Rather than walking away from the complicated relationship situation, Carr and Fulgham chose to eliminate the source of their jealousy. Heather Strong lost her life because she became involved with someone already in a relationship. The love triangle that should have been resolved through communication and separation instead ended in her death. The fact that Carr was pregnant when she participated in the ending added another layer of tragedy to the case. She was bringing new life into the world while taking another life. Both Carr and Fulgham received death sentences initially, though Carr's would later be vacated. The joint nature of the crime meant both faced capital punishment. The kidnapping and ending of Strong demonstrated planning beyond a spontaneous crime of passion. Carr and Fulgham had time to reconsider their plan, but chose to proceed, from a love triangle to another case driven by jealousy and rage. Tina LaSonia Brown. In 2010, Tina LaSonia Brown ended the life of 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman in Pensacola, Florida, in an attack driven by rage over infidelity. Brown beat and set Zimmerman on fire, committing acts of extreme cruelty that would result in a death sentence. As of 2026, Tina Brown is the only woman on Florida's death row, her case representing one of the most brutal crimes committed by a woman in the state's history. Brown had been in a relationship that became complicated when she discovered infidelity. Rather than ending the relationship or confronting her partner, She directed her rage toward Adriana Zimmerman. What happened to Adriana Zimmerman? On March 17, 2010, Brown attacked Adriana Zimmerman. She beat the teenager severely before setting her on fire, inflicting unimaginable suffering. Zimmerman died from her injuries, ending her young life in one of the most painful ways imaginable. The brutality of the attack shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. The attack wasn't a moment of lost control, but rather sustained violence demonstrating clear intent to cause maximum suffering. Brown had time to stop at multiple points but chose to continue the assault. How was she caught? Evidence linked Brown to Zimmerman's death, including witness testimony and forensic analysis of the crime scene. The nature of the injuries made it clear this was deliberate harm rather than an accident. Investigators reconstructed the sequence of events, determining that Brown had beaten Zimmerman before using fire. The progression showed escalating violence driven by rage. What happened at trial? Tina Brown was convicted of first-degree charges. The jury recommended death, and the judge imposed that sentence, finding aggravating circumstances that warranted capital punishment. The extreme cruelty of the crime, both the beating and the fire, created aggravating factors that made death penalty consideration appropriate under Florida law. The suffering inflicted on Zimmerman influenced the sentencing decision. What is her current status? As of 2026, Tina LaSonia Brown remains on Florida's death row, the only woman currently facing execution in the state. Her appeals continue through the court system. Brown has been on death row for over a decade, awaiting the outcome of her appeals. Florida's death penalty process involves extensive review, meaning her case could continue for years. Adriana Zimmerman was a teenager with her whole life ahead of her when Brown's rage ended it. The brutality of her death haunts everyone who encountered the case. The ending of Adriana Zimmerman over relationship jealousy demonstrates how some respond to infidelity with deadly violence rather than simply ending unhealthy relationships. Brown's extreme response cost a young woman her life and resulted in Brown's own life being forfeited. The use of fire as a weapon demonstrated particular cruelty, inflicting suffering beyond the beating. The combination of methods showed escalating rage. Brown's position as the sole woman on Florida's death row makes her case unique. While other women have been sentenced to death in Florida, changes in sentencing laws and commutations have left her alone. The appeals process for death row inmates in Florida is extensive, meaning Brown could remain in legal limbo for years or even decades before any execution occurs. Zimmerman's family continues to advocate for justice, attending hearings and opposing any attempts by Brown to avoid the death penalty. Their grief remains raw decades after losing their daughter. Florida's death penalty has faced legal challenges and reforms over the years, affecting cases like Brown's. Changes in sentencing procedures mean her case receives ongoing scrutiny. As the only woman on Florida's death row, Brown's case attracts particular attention from both supporters and opponents of capital punishment. Her gender makes her situation unique within the state's death row population. From death row to a cross-country spree. Lois Reese. In 2018, Lois Reese ended the lives of two people in separate states. First, her husband in Minnesota, and then a woman in Florida who resembled her. The case became known for the nationwide manhunt that followed, as Russ attempted to assume her second victim's identity. Lois Reese lived in Minnesota with her husband David, presenting as an ordinary woman. Behind this facade, she had developed a serious gambling addiction that was creating massive financial problems. Lois had embezzled significant money from the family business to fund her gambling. When her husband discovered the extent of the theft, she decided to end his life rather than face consequences. What happened to David Reese? In March 2018, Lois shot and ended her husband David's life in their Minnesota home. She then forged his signature to access more money before fleeing to Florida. The ending of David was driven by Lois's need to cover up her gambling debts and embezzlement. Rather than confess to her husband and face the consequences of her actions, she chose to eliminate him. What happened in Florida? After ending her husband, Lois traveled to Florida and befriended Pamela Hutchinson, a woman who bore a physical resemblance to her. In April 2018, Lois shot and ended Hutchinson's life. Lois stole Hutchinson's identification and attempted to assume her identity, using the resemblance to pass herself off as her victim. The identity theft was meant to help Lois evade capture for her husband's death. How was she caught? The nationwide manhunt for Lois Rice involved multiple agencies tracking her movements. Surveillance footage and financial transactions helped investigators follow her trail across state lines. Lois was eventually apprehended in Texas, ending her attempt to evade justice. The multi-state nature of her crimes complicated prosecution, but ensured she faced accountability for both endings. What happened at trial? Lois Rice was convicted in both Minnesota and Florida for the separate endings. She received life sentences in both jurisdictions, ensuring she would spend the remainder of her life in prison. The sentences reflected not just the endings themselves, but also the calculated nature of her actions. Lois had methodically planned both crimes and attempted to escape justice through identity theft. What is her current status? As of 2026, Lois Rice is serving her life sentences in prison for ending her husband and Pamela Hutchinson. She will never be released. The Rice case demonstrated how gambling addiction can drive someone to commit terrible crimes. What began as a financial problem escalated to embezzlement, then to ending her husband to cover it up, and finally to ending a stranger to evade capture. Pamela Hutchinson was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, bearing a resemblance to someone desperate to assume a new identity. Her life was ended not over any personal conflict, but simply because Lois needed someone else's identity to continue hiding. The gambling addiction that drove Lois to embezzle and ultimately end lives highlighted the destructive power of untreated addiction. What began as recreational gambling escalated to compulsive behavior that destroyed everything. Lois had emptied joint bank accounts and forged documents to conceal her gambling losses, demonstrating sustained deception before resorting to ending life. The financial crimes preceded and enabled the violent ones. The multi-state nature of her crimes required coordination between Minnesota, Florida, and Texas law enforcement. Investigators had to track her movements across state lines while building cases in multiple jurisdictions. Media coverage dubbed her the Fugitive Granny, a nickname that belied the serious nature of her crimes. The cutesy moniker minimized that she had ended two people to cover gambling debts and evade justice. David Rice's family was left to mourn, while also grappling with the financial devastation Lois had created through her embezzlement. She had destroyed their loved one and the family business. Hutchinson's family in Florida faced the additional trauma of knowing their loved one was targeted simply for looking like the perpetrator. The randomness of Pamela becoming a victim made her death even more senseless. Lois's relatively advanced age when she committed the crimes drew attention to how addiction and financial desperation can drive anyone to terrible acts. Her demographic profile didn't match typical expectations for someone who would become a cross-country killer. The case demonstrated how modern financial systems make it difficult but not impossible to flee after committing crimes. Credit card transactions and surveillance cameras ultimately led to her capture, despite her attempts to use Hutchinson's identity. Lois's life sentences in both Minnesota and Florida ensure she will never be released, regardless of which state maintains custody. The dual convictions provide redundant security that she remains imprisoned. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From individual crimes to a family conspiracy for custody. Donna Adelson. In 2014, Florida State University law professor Dan Markell was shot and ended in his Tallahassee driveway, a case that would eventually lead investigators to his former mother-in-law, Donna Adelson. The high-profile murder-for-hire case became one of Florida's most closely watched trials, involving a prominent academic family and organized crime connections. Donna Adelson came from an affluent background, presenting herself as a devoted mother and grandmother. Her daughter Wendy had divorced Dan Markel, creating a bitter custody dispute over their 2 children. The custody arrangement required the children to remain in Tallahassee, preventing Wendy from relocating closer to her family in South Florida. This geographic restriction would become central to the motive for Dan's ending. What was the murder-for-hire plot? Prosecutors alleged that Donna Adelson orchestrated a plot to have Dan Markel ended so her daughter could move back to South Florida with the grandchildren. The conspiracy involved hiring hitmen through intermediaries. On July 18, 2014, 2 men shot Dan Markel in his garage as he returned home. The attack was swift and appeared professional, suggesting hired killers rather than a random crime. Dan died from his injuries, ending his life and leaving his children without their father. The custody dispute that had driven the murder-for-hire plot became moot, but in the worst possible way. How were they caught? The investigation into Dan Markel's death took years, gradually building evidence against members of the Adelson family. Investigators traced payments and communications that connected the hitmen to intermediaries and ultimately to the Adelsons. The first arrests came with the actual shooters, then moved up the chain to those who had hired them. Each arrest brought investigators closer to the Adelson family. Wiretaps and witness testimony revealed conversations about the plot, providing evidence of the conspiracy. The recorded conversations proved crucial in connecting Donna to the murder-for-hire scheme. What happened at trial? Donna Adelson's trial became a media spectacle, with extensive coverage of the prominent family's fall. Prosecutors presented evidence showing her role as the matriarch who orchestrated the plot. The jury heard evidence about payments made to the hitmen and intermediaries, tracing the financial trail back to the Adelson family. The money provided concrete proof of the conspiracy. Donna was convicted of first-degree charges related to the murder-for-hire plot. The verdict reflected the jury's belief that she had masterminded the scheme to end her former son-in-law. What was her sentence? Donna Adelson was convicted on all counts in November 2024 and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2024. She was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. The case demonstrated how custody disputes can escalate to deadly extremes when combined with wealth and willingness to hire others to commit violence. Most custody battles, even bitter ones, are fought in courtrooms rather than through hired killers. What is her current status? As of 2026, Donna Adelson is serving her life sentence in Florida, with no possibility of parole. Her family's attempt to resolve a custody dispute through violence resulted in her permanent imprisonment. Other family members faced charges as well, with the conspiracy ultimately destroying the very family Donna had sought to keep together. The irony was profound. Her attempt to bring the grandchildren closer resulted in her complete separation from them. Dan Markel's children lost both their father to violence and access to their maternal grandmother to imprisonment. The custody dispute that drove the conspiracy left the children with far less family than before. The case shocked Florida's legal and academic communities, as a law professor was ended in a conspiracy allegedly involving his own in-laws. The prominence of those involved made the case particularly disturbing. The hitmen who actually carried out the shooting were convicted and sentenced first, with the investigation gradually working its way up to the masterminds. The years-long investigation demonstrated law enforcement's determination to hold everyone involved accountable. Wendy Adelson, Donna's daughter and Dan's ex-wife, faced intense scrutiny but wasn't charged. Questions about her knowledge of the plot remain debated, though prosecutors didn't bring charges against her. The Adelson family's affluence and social standing initially seemed to protect them from consequences, but persistent investigation eventually penetrated the wall of money and influence. Justice, though delayed, ultimately arrived. From family conspiracy to a case of deadly neglect by a caregiver. Gina Emanuel. In 2018, Miami nurse Gina Emanuel ended the life of her 7-year-old adoptive daughter Samaya through neglect and harm. The case shocked the community when it emerged that a licensed healthcare professional had systematically harmed children in her care. Gina Emanuel worked as a nurse and had become a foster parent, adopting Samaya and caring for other children. Her medical training should have equipped her to care for vulnerable children, but instead she used her knowledge to harm them. Emanuel justified her harmful treatment as discipline, a rationale that failed to explain the severity of what she did to Samaya and other children in her home. What happened to Samaya? Samaya Emanuel suffered from medical conditions that required proper care, which her adoptive mother as a nurse was trained to provide. Instead, Emanuel denied Samaya necessary care and subjected her to various forms of mistreatment. The systematic nature of the neglect demonstrated intentional failure to care for a vulnerable child. Emanuel had the knowledge and resources to help Samaya but chose not to provide proper care. Samaya's death in 2018 triggered an investigation that revealed the extent of mistreatment she and other children in Emanuel's home had endured. Were other children affected? Investigators discovered that Emanuel had also harmed 2 other children in her care, leading to additional charges. The pattern of mistreatment extended beyond Samaya. One surviving sibling provided powerful testimony during proceedings, describing life in Emanuel's home. The child famously quoted Cardi B in court, a moment that humanized the children's experiences while showing their resilience. The survivors' accounts helped prosecutors demonstrate that Emanuel's treatment of Samaya wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of harmful behavior toward vulnerable children. How was she caught? Samaya's death prompted medical examination that revealed evidence of neglect and harm. The autopsy findings contradicted any claims that Samaya had simply died from her medical conditions. Investigations into the home environment revealed conditions that shocked authorities. A nurse and foster parent was supposed to provide a safe haven for vulnerable children, not subject them to harm. Testimony from surviving children provided crucial evidence about what had occurred in Emanuel's home. Their bravery in speaking up helped ensure justice for Samaya. What happened at trial? Gina Emanuel was sentenced to life in prison in January 2024 after pleading guilty to first-degree murder and multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The sentencing judge described the neglect of the 7-year-old as calculated cruelty. The fact that Emanuel was a trained nurse made the case particularly egregious. She had sworn oaths to provide care and had the knowledge to recognize when children needed help. Her claims that mistreatment constituted discipline were rejected by the jury, who saw through attempts to justify inexcusable behavior toward vulnerable children. What is her current status? Gina Emanuel is serving a life sentence in Florida for ending Samaya's life and harming other children. She will never again have the opportunity to care for vulnerable children. The case raised troubling questions about how Emanuel was able to become a foster parent and adopt children despite any warning signs that might have existed. The failure of vetting processes allowed a dangerous person access to vulnerable children. Emanuel's medical license was revoked, ensuring she could never work as a nurse again even if somehow released from prison. The revocation acknowledged she had violated every principle of caregiving. Samaya's surviving siblings continue healing from their experiences in Emanuel's home. Their courage in testifying helped ensure she faced accountability for what she had done to them and their sister. The case raised questions about oversight of foster and adoptive parents. How had someone capable of such harm been approved to care for vulnerable children? the vetting process apparently failed to identify red flags. Emmanuel's nursing career added another layer of betrayal. Healthcare professionals swear to, first, do no harm, yet she had harmed the most vulnerable patients imaginable, children in her own home. Miami's child welfare system faced scrutiny following Samaya's death, with questions about how Emmanuel had been allowed to adopt and foster children. The tragedy highlighted systemic failures that need addressing, from a nurse who harmed to another mother who failed to protect. Kimberly Leonie Mills. In 2022, Florida mother Kimberly Leonie Mills ended the life of her 10-year-old son Xavier Williams through harmful treatment she characterized as discipline. The Lake County case revealed systematic mistreatment that culminated in the child's death. Kimberly Mills was a Lake County mother who lived with her boyfriend, Andre Walker. Both adults subjected Xavier to treatment they claimed was punishment for misbehavior. The mistreatment of Xavier escalated over time, with both Mills and Walker participating in harmful acts against the child. What they called discipline crossed into territory that no reasonable person could justify. What happened to Xavier? Xavier Williams endured various forms of harmful treatment from his mother and her boyfriend. The supposed punishments were severe and prolonged, demonstrating intent beyond mere excessive discipline. The systematic nature of the mistreatment showed this wasn't a single incident of lost control. Both adults had repeated opportunities to stop, but chose to continue harming Xavier. Xavier's death in 2022 ended his suffering, but also revealed the extent of what he had endured. Medical examination showed injuries consistent with prolonged mistreatment. How was she caught? Xavier's death triggered an investigation that uncovered the pattern of harmful treatment. Autopsy results demonstrated injuries that couldn't be explained as accidents. Both Mills and Walker were arrested and charged with first-degree counts. The evidence showed both had participated in harming Xavier over an extended period. Investigators gathered evidence showing the escalating nature of the mistreatment, building a timeline of how discipline had become deadly harm. What was the plea agreement? Kimberly Mills agreed to plead guilty and testify against her co-defendant, Andre Walker. The agreement acknowledged her role while securing her cooperation in prosecuting Walker. Mills was sentenced to life in prison as part of the plea deal. While she avoided trial by pleading guilty, she still received the most serious possible sentence. Her testimony against Walker provided prosecutors with insider accounts of what had happened to Xavier. As his mother, she had unique knowledge of the timeline and circumstances of the mistreatment. What is her current status? Kimberly Mills is serving her life sentence in Florida, with her cooperation against Walker now complete. She will spend the rest of her life imprisoned for failing to protect her son and participating in his harm. The case raised questions about how harmful treatment can be disguised as discipline. Mills and Walker's characterization of their actions as punishment didn't change the fact that Xavier suffered and died from their mistreatment. Xavier's death highlighted the importance of recognizing when punishment crosses into harmful territory. Teachers, medical professionals, and community members who interact with children must be vigilant for signs of mistreatment. Mills's willingness to testify against Walker showed some acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but it couldn't undo the harm done to Xavier or bring him back to life. The case highlighted how harmful treatment can be disguised as discipline in households. Both Mills and Walker justified their escalating mistreatment as punishment for misbehavior. Xavier's school and community members, who may have seen signs of mistreatment, faced difficult questions about whether more could have been done to intervene. The tragedy emphasized the importance of reporting suspected harm. Lake County prosecutors emphasized that no form of discipline justifies the level of harm Xavier experienced. The distinction between appropriate correction and harmful treatment is clear, and Mills and Walker crossed that line, from failed protection to a case involving mental illness claims. Julie Schenecker. On January 27, 2011, Julie Schenecker shot and ended the lives of her 2 teenage children in Tampa, Florida. The case shocked the community and raised difficult questions about mental illness and criminal responsibility. Julie Schenecker came from a military family background, married to a U.S. Army officer. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and struggled with mental health issues for years before the tragic events. Julie had received mental health treatment, including medications for her bipolar disorder. However, her condition remained unstable despite interventions. What happened on January 27, 2011? Julie Schenecker ended the lives of both her teenage children using a firearm she had recently purchased. The attacks occurred in their family home, a place that should have been safe. Julie later told investigators she had been upset with her children, describing them as mouthy. This shockingly inadequate explanation for ending their lives demonstrated disturbed thinking. After the attacks, Julie remained at the scene, making no attempt to flee or conceal what she had done. Her behavior after the crimes suggested someone not thinking clearly. How was she caught? Julie's husband returned home to discover the horrific scene. Julie was found at the home covered in blood, making her involvement immediately obvious. She provided a confession to investigators, describing what she had done to her children. The confession included her bizarre rationale about them being mouthy teenagers. Evidence at the scene corroborated Julie's account of the attacks. The firearm and other physical evidence left no doubt about what had occurred. What was the insanity defense? Julie's defense team pursued an insanity defense, arguing her bipolar disorder prevented her from understanding her actions were wrong. Expert witnesses testified about her mental state at the time of the crimes. Prosecutors countered that Julie had shown planning and awareness, including purchasing the firearm specifically for the attacks. The premeditation suggested someone who understood what she was doing. The jury ultimately rejected the insanity defense, finding that despite her mental illness, Julie knew the difference between right and wrong when she ended her children's lives. What happened at trial? Julie Schenecker was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree charges for ending her children. The jury's verdict reflected their belief that mental illness didn't excuse her actions. She was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, ensuring she would never be released. The consecutive life sentences acknowledged both children she had ended. The trial raised broader questions about mental illness and criminal justice. While Julie clearly suffered from bipolar disorder, the jury determined this didn't absolve her of responsibility for her children's deaths. What is her current status? Julie Schenecker is serving her life sentences in Florida with no possibility of release. She will spend the remainder of her life behind bars for ending her teenage children. The case sparked discussions about mental health treatment and intervention. Julie had been diagnosed and treated for bipolar disorder, yet the system failed to prevent the tragedy. Her children's deaths represented failures at multiple levels: in mental health care, in family support systems, and in recognizing when someone with mental illness poses danger to others. The military family context added complexity, with questions about whether the stresses of military life contributed to Julie's deterioration. Her husband's service meant frequent moves and separations that may have impacted family stability. Tampa's community was left traumatized by the crime, particularly as details emerged about how Julie had described her children. The teenagers had been typical teens, and her characterization of them as deserving harm shocked observers. The case continues to be studied in discussions of mental illness and criminal responsibility. Where should the line be drawn between illness that diminishes capacity and illness that doesn't excuse harmful actions? From mental illness claims to a case of concealment and deception. Lori Shaver. In 2018, investigators discovered human remains buried in the backyard of a Florida home, leading to the arrest of Lori Shaver for ending her husband, Michael. The case became known for Shaver's attempt to blame a child for the crime. Lori Shaver had reported her husband Michael missing, claiming he had left the family. For years, she maintained this story, while Michael's body remained buried in their own backyard. The Shavers had experienced marital difficulties, with disputes that would ultimately prove deadly. What started as domestic conflict escalated to Michael's death and burial. What happened to Michael Shaver? Michael Shaver was ended and buried on their property. The burial location, their own backyard, demonstrated Lori's attempt to permanently conceal the crime. After ending Michael, Lori impersonated him through texts and social media, creating the illusion he was alive and had voluntarily left. The digital deception helped her maintain the missing person narrative. Family and friends believed Michael had abandoned his family, with Lori's manufactured evidence supporting this story. The deception continued for years before the truth emerged. How was the body discovered? In 2018, investigators received information that led them to excavate the Shaver property. The discovery of human remains in the backyard proved Michael hadn't left voluntarily. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains were Michael Shaver. The backyard burial location immediately pointed suspicion toward Lori. Evidence showed Michael had been deceased since 2015, meaning Lori had maintained the deception for approximately 3 years before the body was found. What was Lori's defense? In a shocking defense strategy, Lori Shaver attempted to blame her 7-year-old daughter for Michael's death. The claim that a young child had ended her father and that Lori had simply concealed it was met with skepticism. The physical evidence contradicted claims that a child could have committed the crime. The burial alone required adult strength and capability. Prosecutors argued that Lori's attempt to implicate her own daughter demonstrated moral bankruptcy. Rather than accept responsibility, she was willing to blame a child. What happened at trial? Lori Shaver was convicted of second-degree murder on September 13, 2024, and was sentenced to life in prison in November 2024. However, as of 2026, her defense continues to file appeals centered on the testimony of her daughter, who claimed responsibility for the shooting during the trial. What is her current status? Lori Shaver is serving her life sentence in Florida for Michael's death. Her attempt to evade justice through years of deception ultimately failed. The daughter Lori tried to blame has had to live with knowing her mother attempted to frame her for her father's death. The betrayal extended beyond ending Michael to trying to destroy their child's life. Michael Shaver's family finally received answers about what happened to him, though the truth brought no comfort. He had been ended by his wife and buried in their own backyard while she lived above his grave. The discovery of Michael's remains 3 years after his death demonstrated how difficult it can be to investigate missing person cases when family members lie. Lori's deception delayed justice but ultimately couldn't prevent it. The case received extensive media coverage due to the backyard burial and the shocking defense strategy of blaming a child. Public outrage over attempting to frame her daughter added to condemnation of Lori's actions. Forensic analysis of the burial site and remains helped investigators reconstruct what had happened to Michael. Even after years in the ground, evidence remained that proved Lori's guilt. From backyard burial to another tragic case of harm to a young victim. Nyoshka Bello. In 2019, Florida woman Nyoshka Bello ended the life of her 2-year-old daughter, Janessa Sandoval, by strangling her. The case shocked investigators due to the young age of the victim and the method used. Nyoshka Bello was a young mother who struggled with the challenges of parenting. Whatever frustrations she faced, they escalated to deadly violence against her toddler daughter. The case demonstrated how some parents harm the most vulnerable victims imaginable, their own young children, who depend on them completely for survival and protection. What happened to Janessa? On the day of Janessa's death, Bello used a bra to strangle the 2-year-old. The choice of weapon and method demonstrated deliberate action rather than an accident. Strangling requires sustained effort, giving Bello multiple opportunities to stop. The fact that she continued until Janessa died demonstrated clear intent to end her daughter's life. Janessa's small size and age meant she couldn't defend herself or escape. She was completely vulnerable to her mother's actions. How was Bello caught? After Janessa's death, Bello contacted authorities, though the exact circumstances of the initial report varied in accounts. Medical examination quickly revealed Janessa hadn't died from natural causes. Forensic evidence showed strangulation as the cause of death. The physical findings on Janessa's body demonstrated she had been harmed, not that some accident had occurred. Bello's statements to investigators evolved as evidence mounted against her. The changing stories suggested attempts to avoid responsibility for what she had done. What was her stated motive? Bello claimed frustration and anger drove her actions. The admission that she ended her toddler over normal parenting frustrations shocked investigators and the community. All parents experience frustration with young children's behavior. Most find healthy ways to manage these feelings rather than directing deadly violence at their children. The disparity between typical parenting challenges and Bello's extreme response highlighted dangerous dysfunction. Her inability to cope with normal parenting stress resulted in her daughter's death. What happened at trial? Nioshka Bello was convicted of first-degree charges for ending Janessa. The evidence of deliberate strangulation eliminated any possibility of accident or lesser charges. She was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring she would never again have the opportunity to harm a child. The sentence reflected the vulnerability of her victim and the deliberate nature of the crime. The method Bello used, strangling with a bra, particularly disturbed observers. She had used an everyday item to end her toddler's life over frustration with normal behavior. What is her current status? Nioshka Bello is serving her life sentence in Florida for Janessa's death. She will spend her remaining years imprisoned for ending her 2-year-old daughter. Janessa's short life ended at the hands of the person who should have protected her most. At just 2 years old, she had barely begun experiencing the world when her mother ended her life. The case highlighted the importance of resources for parents struggling with the challenges of raising young children. Frustration with toddler behavior is normal. Deadly violence in response is not. Bello's young age when she became a mother may have contributed to her inability to cope, though this couldn't excuse ending Janessa. Many young parents successfully raise children without resorting to violence. The tragic irony is that resources exist to help struggling parents, from parenting classes to mental health services to temporary respite care. Bello had options beyond violence if only she had sought help. Janessa's death represents a complete failure of adult responsibility. At 2 years old, she was entirely dependent on adults for survival, and the one adult who should have protected her most instead ended her life. The use of a bra as the weapon showed Bello used whatever was at hand, suggesting the attack wasn't long premeditated, but rather arose from immediate rage. This didn't make it less deadly or less culpable. From a mother's deadly frustration to a case of elaborate deception. Brianna Williams. In 2019, Florida mother Brianna Williams reported her 5-year-old daughter Taylor Rose Williams missing, triggering a massive search. The case would ultimately reveal that Brianna had ended Taylor's life and staged a disappearance to cover up the crime. Brianna Williams had been raised by her uncle and served in the military, presenting an image of stability and responsibility. Behind this facade, Taylor was suffering from severe neglect. Taylor's death resulted from prolonged neglect, with Brianna failing to provide basic necessities. The systematic nature of the neglect demonstrated intentional failure to care for her daughter. What happened to Taylor? Taylor Rose Williams suffered from severe neglect that led to her death. Evidence suggested prolonged lack of proper nutrition and care. After Taylor died, Brianna concealed her death and staged a disappearance. The elaborate deception included false police reports and public appeals for help finding the supposedly missing child. Brianna disposed of Taylor's body, then reported her missing to deflect suspicion. The staged disappearance bought her time but ultimately failed to prevent discovery. How was she caught? The missing person investigation revealed inconsistencies in Brianna's story. Investigators found evidence that Taylor had been dead before being reported missing. Taylor's remains were eventually discovered, ending the staged search and confirming she hadn't been kidnapped or wandered away. The discovery shifted the investigation from missing person to homicide. Forensic evidence showed Taylor had died from neglect-related causes. The autopsy findings contradicted Brianna's missing person narrative. What happened at trial? Brianna Williams was convicted of second-degree charges for Taylor's death. The conviction reflected that while the neglect may not have been premeditated ending, it demonstrated such disregard for Taylor's life that it constituted a crime. She was sentenced to life in prison in September 2022. The judge called the case a tragedy all around, acknowledging the loss of Taylor and the destruction of Brianna's life. The staged disappearance demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Someone innocent doesn't fake their child's kidnapping and dispose of the body. What is her current status? Brianna Williams is serving her life sentence in Florida for Taylor's death. She will spend her remaining years imprisoned for the neglect that ended her daughter's life and the deception that followed. The Jacksonville community that had rallied to search for missing Taylor was left devastated upon learning her mother had been responsible for her death all along. The fake appeals for help added cruel deception to the tragedy. Taylor Rose Williams died from preventable neglect, her death representing a complete failure of parental responsibility. At just 5 years old, she deserved care and protection, but received neither, from staged disappearance to a case captured on video. Sarah Boone. In February 2020, Sarah Boone ended the life of her boyfriend Jorge Torres Jr. in Winter Park, Florida, in what became known as the suitcase murder case. The case gained notoriety because Boone filmed Torres pleading for help while zipped inside a suitcase. Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres had a relationship marked by dysfunction. Both had issues with substances, and their relationship involved various conflicts. Boone would claim the suitcase incident was part of a game gone wrong, an explanation that the evidence would contradict. The video she recorded proved crucial in determining what really happened. What happened on February 23, 2020? According to Boone's initial story, she and Torres were playing hide-and-seek while consuming substances. She claimed Torres willingly got into a suitcase as part of the game. Boone zipped Torres inside the suitcase and left him there overnight. When she checked on him the next morning, he was deceased. Torres died from suffocation inside the suitcase, unable to escape or get adequate air. The manner of death demonstrated he had been trapped and helpless. What did the video show? The most damning evidence came from Boone's own phone. She had recorded video of Torres inside the suitcase pleading to be let out. In the video, Torres can be heard saying he couldn't breathe and begging to be released. Boone responded with mocking comments rather than helping him. The video contradicted Boone's claims that this was a playful game. Torres was clearly in distress, and Boone was aware of his suffering but chose not to release him. How was she caught? Boone herself called 911 to report finding Torres deceased in the suitcase. Her initial statements suggested an accidental death during a game. However, investigators found the videos on Boone's phone. The recordings showed this was no accident, but rather deliberate confinement that resulted in Torres's death. The videos provided irrefutable evidence of Boone's awareness of Torres's distress. She had recorded him pleading for help and chosen not to provide it. What was her defense? Boone claimed she was a victim of domestic situations and that confining Torres was somehow defensive. She attempted to portray the suitcase incident as justified based on their relationship dynamics. The video evidence undermined her defensive claims. Her mocking tone while Torres pleaded for help didn't suggest someone acting in fear for their safety. Boone went through multiple attorneys before trial, with various legal representatives withdrawing from her case. The attorney changes delayed proceedings but didn't change the strength of the evidence against her. What happened at trial? Sarah Boone was convicted of second-degree charges in October 2024. The jury rejected her claims of accidental death or justified actions. She was sentenced to life in prison in December 2024, ensuring she would never be released for ending Torres. The sentence reflected the cruel nature of his death, trapped in a suitcase while his girlfriend mocked his pleas. The video Boone herself recorded sealed her fate. Her decision to document Torres's suffering provided prosecutors with undeniable evidence of her actions and awareness. What is her current status? As of 2026, Sarah Boone is serving her life sentence in Florida for Jorge Torres's death. The suitcase murder case remains one of Florida's most disturbing recent cases due to the video evidence. Torres died a terrifying death, trapped and unable to escape while his girlfriend recorded him rather than helping. The video haunted everyone who saw it during trial proceedings. Boone's filming of Torres's distress demonstrated callousness beyond typical relationship violence. She had the power to save him simply by unzipping the suitcase, but chose to record his suffering instead. The case raised awareness about how substances can contribute to deadly situations, though intoxication doesn't excuse choosing to trap someone in a suitcase and leaving them to suffocate. Torres's family had to endure hearing the videos in court, experiencing their loved one's final terrified pleas. The recordings made the trial particularly difficult for those who cared about Jorge. Legal observers noted that Boone's own documentation of the crime made conviction nearly certain. Her decision to record Torres's distress eliminated any reasonable doubt about what occurred. The suitcase murder case became one of Florida's most notorious recent crimes, studied in discussions of domestic violence, substance use, and how technology can provide evidence of crimes. From filmed evidence to a case of hidden tragedy. Tanisha Locke Crowell. In 2017, Tanisha Locke Crowell gave birth and ended her newborn daughter's life in Florida's Panhandle, then buried the body in woods. The case involved concealment of birth and deliberate harm to a defenseless newborn. Tanisha Crowell had concealed her pregnancy, with few people aware she was expecting. When she gave birth, rather than seeking help or surrendering the baby safely, she ended the infant's life. Florida, like many states, has safe haven laws allowing parents to surrender newborns safely at designated locations. Crowell had legal options to avoid raising the child without resorting to violence. What happened after the birth? After giving birth, Crowell ended her newborn daughter's life. She then buried the infant's body in a wooded area, attempting to conceal what she had done. The newborn never had a chance at life. Within hours of birth, her mother had ended her life and hidden her body. The burial in woods demonstrated Crowell's awareness that what she had done was wrong. Someone who believed their actions were justified wouldn't hide the body. How was she caught? Investigators received information that led them to investigate Crowell. The discovery of the infant's remains in the woods confirmed she had given birth and concealed the death. Forensic evidence demonstrated the infant had been born alive, eliminating claims of stillbirth. The baby had taken breaths before Crowell ended her life. Medical examination showed the infant's death resulted from deliberate actions rather than natural causes or complications. Crowell had actively harmed her newborn. What was her stated motive? Prosecutors suggested panic about concealing the birth drove Crowell's actions. Rather than face the reality of having given birth, she chose to eliminate the evidence. The existence of safe haven laws meant Crowell had alternatives. She could have left the baby at a hospital, fire station, or other safe haven location with no questions asked and no criminal consequences. Her choice to end the infant's life rather than utilize safe surrender options demonstrated deliberate decision-making. She had legal ways to avoid raising the child, but chose violence instead. What happened at trial? Tanisha Crowell was convicted of first-degree charges in May 2018. The jury found she had deliberately ended her newborn's life. She was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring she would never be released. The sentence reflected the complete vulnerability of her victim, a newborn infant who depended entirely on her mother for survival. The burial of the body in woods added to the horror of the case. Crowell had not only ended her daughter, but discarded her like trash. What is her current status? Tanisha Lachey Crowell is serving her life sentence in Florida for ending her newborn daughter. She will spend the remainder of her life imprisoned for the crime. The infant never received a name, never experienced anything beyond the first hours of life. Her existence began and ended at her mother's hands. Cases like Crowell's highlight the importance of educating the public about safe haven laws. Parents facing unwanted pregnancies have legal options that don't involve harming infants. The tragedy extended beyond the infant's death to the complete waste of potential. That baby could have been safely surrendered and adopted by a loving family, but Crowell's panic-driven violence eliminated that possibility. The infant's body being discovered in woods rather than receiving proper burial added to the cruelty of the case. Even in death, Crowell denied her daughter basic dignity. Florida's safe haven law exists specifically to prevent tragedies like this. Parents can surrender newborns anonymously with no legal consequences, yet Crowell chose violence instead. Public health campaigns continue emphasizing safe haven options, hoping to prevent future cases of desperate mothers harming infants. Education about alternatives could save lives. Crowell's life sentence ensures she will never have the opportunity to harm another child. The infant she ended will never have that opportunity either. Her life stolen within hours of birth. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.